At Thanksgiving dinner, my son announced he was cutting me out of his will right in front of everyone. He said I was too much of a burden. I just nodded, a quiet calm settling over me. He didn't know I'd found his secret a week before. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Now let me tell you how this all began. Please like, share, and let us know where you are listening from. Eleanor Vance, or Ellie as her friends knew her, cherished the quiet rhythms of her life. At 67, the thought of another bustling ski trip with her son Daniel and his boisterous family was more exhausting than appealing. She'd politely declined his annual invitation, citing a burgeoning garden and a long list of books to read. The truth was, she simply preferred the solitude of her large, old house in the suburbs. It was a grand place full of memories, perhaps too many, but it was hers, and its spacious rooms offered a comfort that crowded ski lodges could not. The house, however, was also a formidable opponent in the battle against dust and grime. Its high ceilings and intricate woodwork, once a source of pride, now felt overwhelming. Knowing she couldn't tackle a true deep clean herself, Ellie took a neighbor's glowing recommendation and hired Sofia Rojas. Sofia was a young woman, perhaps in her early 30s, with kind eyes and a quiet efficiency that Ellie immediately appreciated. She exuded a gentle professionalism, and Ellie felt a sense of relief knowing her beloved home would be in capable hands. That Tuesday morning unfolded like any other peaceful day. The sun streamed through the kitchen window as Ellie hummed softly, preparing her morning tea. She watched Sofia ascend the grand staircase, her cleaning caddy clinking softly, ready to tackle the upstairs bathrooms. Ellie, meanwhile, retreated to her beloved rose garden. The rich scent of damp earth and blooming petals filled the air as she meticulously pruned a particularly stubborn bush. The only sounds were the distant chirping of birds and the gentle rustle of leaves. A perfect, tranquil morning. Then, the piercing jingle of her phone shattered the serenity. It was Sofia. Ellie frowned, wondering if the young woman had a question about a particular cleaning product. She answered, a pleasant greeting on her lips, but her words died in her throat. Sofia's voice was a terrified whisper, barely audible over the phone's receiver. Mrs. Vance, please. You need to come inside now. Ellie's heart gave a jolt. Sofia, what is it? Is everything all right? No, Sofia breathed, a raw edge of fear in her tone. I was cleaning the master bathroom, and I heard footsteps. From the attic. Heavy footsteps. Ellie's brow furrowed in confusion. Footsteps? Sofia, dear, that's impossible. No one else is home. It's just you and me. She tried to inject a calming reassurance into her voice, dismissing it as the creaks and groans of an old house. But Sofia's insistence was firm, overriding Ellie's logical dismissal. No, Mrs. Vance, I'm telling you, it wasn't the house. I saw her. There's a woman up there. A cold dread began to seep into Ellie's bones. You saw her? Who? How could anyone be up there? Sofia's voice, though still hushed, gained a disturbing clarity as she recounted the chilling encounter. She was just sitting there, Mrs. Vance, in that old rocking chair you have in the attic. Like she owned the place. She looked at me, just calm. She didn't even flinch when I gasped. The image Sofia painted was more unsettling than an intruder caught in the act. This woman wasn't hiding. She was simply there. And then came the most horrifying detail. She told me not to scream, Sofia continued, her voice trembling now. She just said, don't scream, Sofia, I live here. She knew my name, Mrs. Vance. How did she know my name? The question hung in the air, a chilling echo. Ellie felt the blood drain from her face. How could this woman, a complete stranger, know Sofia's name? It wasn't just a break-in, it was a profound violation, a silent observation that turned her safe haven into a terrifying unknown. Terror, cold and sharp, gripped Ellie. Her mind, usually so orderly, raced with panicked thoughts. She couldn't allow Sofia to be in danger. Sofia, listen to me very carefully, Ellie commanded, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. Put the phone down quietly. Don't make another sound. Just walk out of the house. Go straight to your car and wait for me there. Do not look back. I'm calling 911. Moments later, Sophia emerged from the front door, her face ashen, her body visibly shaking. She didn't look back, just moved with a frantic urgency towards her car. As she reached it, she turned to Ellie, her eyes wide with lingering fear. "She's still up there, Mrs. Vance," Sophia confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper. "As I was leaving, I could hear her moving around like she was settling in." Ellie stood frozen on her lawn, the gentle breeze suddenly feeling like an icy hand. Someone was living in her house? Undetected? The thought was grotesque, repulsive. Had she been watched? How long? Every creak, every shadow, every fleeting sense of unease she'd ever experienced in her home now took on a sinister new meaning. Within minutes, the wail of sirens pierced the suburban quiet. 2 patrol cars pulled up, and 2 young officers emerged, their uniforms crisp, their faces serious. Ellie felt a peculiar mix of relief and acute embarrassment. Relief that help had arrived, but embarrassment at the surreal situation. She imagined their polite skepticism, fearing they'd find nothing, and she'd be left looking like a foolish old woman, overreacting to an empty house. Officer Morales, a tall, authoritative woman, listened patiently to Ellie's breathless account. She then turned to Sophia, who recounted her story with trembling conviction. "Mrs. Vance," Officer Morales said, her voice firm but kind, "we're going to need you to stay outside. We'll secure the premises." Ellie nodded numbly, watching as the officers, hands on their holsters, entered her home, their flashlights cutting through the dim interior. The minutes that followed stretched into an eternity, 20 minutes, perhaps more. Every second was a hammer blow to her sense of security, chipping away at the foundation of her peaceful existence. Finally, Officer Morales reappeared, her grim expression confirming Ellie's worst fears. Her eyes met Ellie's, filled with a grave certainty. "Mrs. Vance," she stated, her voice quiet, "we found someone." And then from the shadow of her own doorway, a woman stepped out, escorted by the other officer. She was thin, her clothes somewhat rumpled, her face etched with the lines of age, perhaps in her early 50s. As their eyes met across the manicured lawn, a gasp escaped Ellie's lips. The world tilted. The familiar face, aged and weary, yet undeniably familiar. A name buried deep beneath years of silence and pain clawed its way to the surface. "Victoria," Ellie whispered, the name a ghost from a past she thought long buried. The name Victoria hung in the crisp autumn air, a fragile, impossible whisper. Ellie stared, her mind struggling to reconcile the gaunt, wild-eyed woman before her with the vibrant memory of her former sister-in-law. Victoria Hayes. But Victoria Hayes was dead, 15 years dead to be precise. Ellie had attended the funeral, a mournful affair on a gray, drizzly day. She'd stood beside her brother-in-law Richard, a stoic pillar of grief, as the polished casket was lowered into the earth. She'd offered what comfort she could, witnessed the finality of it all. How could this be? As if sensing Ellie's disbelief, the woman offered a faint, almost mischievous smile, then gave a casual wave of her hand, utterly devoid of remorse or explanation. It was as if they'd simply bumped into each other at the local grocery store, a chance encounter rather than a shocking resurrection from the grave. The gesture, so blithely normal, confirmed the impossible. Victoria was alive. Officer Morales, her expression a mix of confusion and professional detachment, stepped forward. "Mrs. Vance, do you know this woman?" Ellie could only nod, her voice catching in her throat. She's my former sister-in-law, Victoria Hayes, but she died 15 years ago." The words felt foreign, absurd even as they tumbled from her lips. Victoria let out a short, harsh laugh, devoid of humor, a sound that scraped at Ellie's nerves. "Not quite dead, Ellie. Just disappeared." Her gaze was unwavering, a challenge. A wave of anger, hot and unexpected, surged through Ellie, momentarily eclipsing her shock. "Helen," she snapped, using Victoria's seldom-used middle name, the one her mother-in-law had preferred. "What the hell is going on? We buried you." Richard was heartbroken. The children, Olivia and James, they grew up without a mother. For a fleeting second, a flicker of something resembling remorse, or perhaps just a weary sadness, crossed Victoria's face. It was gone almost instantly, but it was enough to hint at the vibrant woman Ellie had once known. The woman who had captivated her brother-in-law, Richard, all those years ago. Then the hardened mask returned. I had to, Victoria stated, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. The debts were overwhelming: gambling, credit cards, loans Richard knew nothing about. I was drowning, Ellie, drowning in a mess I couldn't get out of. Faking my own death was the only way. Ellie stared, horrified, as Victoria elaborated on her gruesome scheme with a chilling detachment. I staged a car accident just off the highway, near the old bridge. It was messy enough. I had a dentist friend, owed me a huge favor from way back. He helped compromise the dental records, twisted a few things, and a little bone fragment, a bit of hair from a cadaver. It was all too easy to make it look like me. The police, the medical examiner, they bought it. Richard bought it. Her lips twisted into a wry, bitter smile. Everyone bought it. Ellie took an involuntary step back. The coldness in Victoria's voice, her gaunt, almost skeletal appearance, and those wild, haunted eyes were far removed from the charming, vivacious woman she remembered. This was a stranger, a ghost with a cruel story to tell. And the children, Ellie asked, her voice barely a whisper, did you ever think about Olivia and James? How could you just abandon them? Victoria's gaze softened, a flicker of something almost human in her eyes. I watched them, she admitted, her voice lower now. From a distance sometimes. On their birthdays, through the fence at school plays. It was hard, Ellie, harder than you know. But I couldn't risk them being dragged into my mess. They were better off without me, without the debts, without the shame. The explanation sounded rehearsed, a justification honed over 15 years of self-imposed exile. Officer Morales, having listened to this bizarre confession with a stoic expression, finally intervened. Ma'am, we're going to need to take you down to the station. This is a very serious matter. Identity fraud, trespassing, perhaps even more, depending on what we uncover. She gestured to the other officer who moved to gently take Victoria's arm. As the officers prepared to lead her away, Victoria met Ellie's gaze once more. You want to know how long? She asked, a challenge in her eyes. How long have you been living here? Ellie clarified, her voice hoarse. Victoria's lips curved into a sly, almost triumphant smirk. 3 months, Ellie, since July. 3 months. Ellie's mind raced, replaying the past few months. The subtle signs, the unusually rapid depletion of groceries, which she'd blamed on her own forgetfulness. The inexplicable creaks and rustles she'd dismissed as the house settling, or the wind. The faint sensation of being watched, which she'd attributed to old age and an overactive imagination. A cup left on the counter, then found in the sink. A blanket, folded differently. She had chalked it all up to the quirks of an old house and an aging mind. The thought was sickening. Her home, her sanctuary, had been invaded, silently, methodically, by a ghost from her past. Just as Officer Morales was guiding Victoria toward the patrol car, Victoria turned her head, her gaze piercing Ellie's. A triumphant, almost malicious glint entered her eyes. And then she dropped the bombshell, a statement that shattered Ellie's world far more effectively than any staged car crash. Daniel gave me the key. Victoria's words, Daniel gave me the key, struck Ellie with the force of a physical blow. The world tilted on its axis, the ground beneath her feet suddenly precarious. Her son, Daniel, her only child, the boy she had raised, the man she trusted implicitly. He knew? He had actively participated in this grotesque deception, this invasion of her home. Officer Morales, sensing the shift in Ellie's demeanor, turned her attention back to Victoria, her expression hardening. Ellie stood utterly speechless, the betrayal a bitter taste in her tongue, searing through her shock and anger. Her mind struggled to comprehend it, to piece together how her beloved son could be involved in such a calculated act of cruelty. Victoria, seemingly oblivious to the seismic shift her revelation had caused in Ellie's world, continued to speak, her voice disturbingly casual. He was reluctant at first, of course, didn't want to get involved, but I convinced him it was temporary, just until I could figure things out, get back on my feet. A faint, almost pitying smile touched her lips. He felt sorry for me, I think, family loyalty and all that. Family loyalty? Ellie whispered, her voice raw, barely audible. The words were a bitter accusation, a condemnation that resonated with the 15 years of false grief and abandonment. You abandoned your family, Victoria. You let your children believe you were dead. That's not family loyalty. That's cruelty. Pure, unadulterated cruelty. Victoria bristled, a flash of her old defensiveness returning. You don't understand the pressure I was under, Ellie. The threats. Richard and the kids were better off thinking I was dead. Safer. She spoke as if this absolved her, as if her decision had been an act of sacrificial love rather than profound selfishness. Suddenly, Sophia, who had been standing silently by her car, stepped forward, her face still pale but her eyes resolute. Mrs. Vance, she began tentatively, then gained conviction. Yesterday, when I was cleaning Daniel's old room, I found empty food containers under his bed. Water bottles, too. I thought maybe he just forgot them from a visit, but there were so many, and they looked like they'd been hidden. The pieces, sharp and painful, began to click into place for Ellie. Daniel's insistent calls about the ski trip, his feigned concern for her being alone in the big house, how much she needed a change of scenery, his frequent, unexpected visits, always with some excuse about checking on the house or helping with a chore. It wasn't concern, it was reconnaissance. It was enabling a lie, facilitating an intruder, all under the guise of filial devotion. How often, Ellie asked, her voice flat, devoid of emotion, the question aimed at Victoria but really for herself. How often did Daniel visit you? Victoria shrugged, a gesture of indifference that chilled Ellie to the bone. Every few days, sometimes more. Usually when you were sleeping or out for your walks. He was very careful, very discreet. She even sounded proud of him, proud of his complicity. He brought me groceries, some medicine for my headaches, even helped me set up a little camping stove and a battery-powered radio up in the attic. Said it would make my stay more comfortable. Officer Morales, who had been taking notes diligently, closed her pad with a snap. Her expression was grim. Mrs. Vance, this is far more serious than simple trespassing. Identity fraud is a federal offense. Depending on the extent of Mr. Vance's involvement, this could escalate quickly, possibly involving the FBI. The mention of federal agencies only deepened the knot of dread in Ellie's stomach. As the officers began to lead Victoria away towards the patrol car, Victoria paused, turning her head back towards Ellie. Her gaze was unreadable, a strange mix of something akin to regret and a chilling lack of empathy. I never meant for any of this to hurt you, Ellie, she said, her voice surprisingly soft. Daniel said you'd been lonely, living in this big house all by yourself. He thought you wouldn't mind the company. Ellie stood frozen, the words hitting her like a final cruel blow. Daniel said you'd been lonely. Her vulnerability, her quiet grief for a past life, her longing for connection, all of it had been weaponized. Her son, her own flesh and blood, had not only allowed this invasion, but had rationalized it by preying on her loneliness. It wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a manipulation of her deepest, most private emotions. She was speechless, the depths of this casual cruelty far exceeding anything she could have imagined. Sophia, sensing Ellie's profound shock and distress, gently put an arm around her. The young woman stayed by Ellie's side, a silent, comforting presence, until her husband arrived to pick her up. They exchanged few words, both too shaken by the morning's events. As the police cars finally drove away, taking Victoria and the remnants of Ellie's shattered peace with them, Ellie was left standing alone on her lawn. The house, once her sanctuary, now felt tainted, a monument to deception. But the worst part wasn't the intruder in her attic or the years of a fabricated death. It was the crushing realization that her own son, Daniel, had put her there. He had orchestrated this, rationalized it, and kept it hidden. Tomorrow, she vowed, she would find out why. The night was a torment. Ellie lay awake, rigid in her bed, every familiar sound of the old house amplified into a sinister whisper. The creak of the floorboards, the rustle of leaves against the window, the distant hum of the refrigerator. Each was a fresh reminder of the violation, of Victoria's silent presence, of Daniel's unthinkable betrayal. Sleep was an elusive comfort, chased away by a churning mix of anger, hurt, and profound confusion. How could her son, her only son, have done this? Morning brought no solace. Ellie sat at her kitchen table, a lukewarm cup of tea forgotten beside her, staring blankly at Daniel's contact on her phone screen. Her thumb hovered over the call button, a tremor running through her hand. How did one even begin this conversation? How do you ask your child why they've allowed a woman who had faked her own death and caused untold grief, to live secretly in your attic for 3 months? The enormity of the deception felt suffocating. As if on cue, Daniel's name flashed across her screen. He was calling her. A fresh wave of indignation washed over Ellie. He sounded annoyingly cheerful, the cheerful buzz of a ski lodge in the background. "Hey Mom, just checking in. How's everything at home? I hope you're not getting too lonely without us around." The innocent words, dripping with feigned concern, were like salt in an open wound. Ellie didn't bother with pleasantries. She cut straight to the core, her voice remarkably steady despite the tempest raging within her. "Helen Morrison is alive." The line went silent. Not a click, not a rustle. Just a vast, echoing void stretched taut between them. For a long moment, Ellie could almost hear Daniel's mind racing, calculating, before a heavy sigh finally broke the silence. "How did you find out?" he asked, his voice flat, devoid of the earlier cheer. The question was not one of surprise, but of resignation, an admission of guilt that twisted the knife in Ellie's heart. "How did I find out?" Ellie repeated, her voice rising now, the carefully constructed calm shattering. "She was in my attic, Daniel. My cleaning lady found her. The police just took her away. You lied to me for months. You orchestrated this whole thing. Now you tell me, what in God's name were you thinking?" Daniel's immediate response was a defensive one. "She needed help, Mom. She was desperate. After all these years, she reached out, and she had nowhere else to go. She was living rough, barely surviving." "She chose to be desperate, Daniel," Ellie retorted, pushing herself up from the table, beginning to pace the length of her kitchen. "She chose to fake her death, to abandon her children, to let Richard grieve for a wife who was very much alive. How could you be a part of that? How could you bring that lie into my home?" Daniel's voice hardened, losing its placating tone. "You don't understand the whole situation, Mom. Helen didn't have a choice. She was in real danger. People she owed money to, dangerous people, were still looking for her. Her life was genuinely at risk." "There are always legal choices, Daniel," Ellie countered, frustration mounting. She could have gone to the police. She could have filed for bankruptcy. She could have faced her problems like an adult, instead of inflicting this trauma on everyone she supposedly cared about. "And what about your consequences, Mom?" Daniel's voice abruptly shifted, a cold, calculated edge replacing his earlier defensiveness. The change in topic was jarring. Unexpected. Ellie paused, mid-stride, confusion momentarily overriding her fury. "My consequences? What are you talking about?" "Charlotte and I," Daniel continued, his tone eerily calm, detached, "we've been worried about you. Living alone in that big house at 67, it's too much for you, Mom. Too much upkeep, too much isolation." A cold dread began to pool in Ellie's stomach. "What are you saying, Daniel?" "We've been discussing it for a while," he went on, as if discussing a business proposal. "We think it's time you move somewhere more suitable, a nice retirement community perhaps, or assisted living where you'd have company and someone to look after you." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Ellie felt as though the floor had dropped out from under her. "You want to put me in a home?" The question was a whisper, laced with disbelief and profound hurt. "It's for your own good, Mom," Daniel insisted, his voice unwavering. "This incident with Victoria just proves our point. You're not safe living alone, and frankly, her being there, it was kind of perfect, in a way." Ellie stared at the phone, aghast. "Perfect? How could it possibly be perfect?" "She was keeping an eye on you," Daniel explained, as if offering a benevolent service, "making sure you were all right, that you didn't fall or forget your medicine. It was mutually beneficial, Mom. She had a place to hide, and we had someone to make sure you were okay without having to hover all the time." Enraged, Ellie gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles whitened. Mutually beneficial? She spat, the word a venomous curse. You put a woman who faked her death and has a history of deceit in my attic to spy on me? Without my knowledge or consent? That's not beneficial, Daniel. That's sinister. That's a betrayal beyond anything I could have imagined. If you're finding this and this story as unbelievable as I did, please do me a favor. Keep watching to see how this twisted tale unfolds. Hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss a single part of what happens next. Dramatic, Mom? You think this is dramatic? Ellie's voice was sharp with disbelief. Daniel, however, simply dismissed her anger. Look, Helen needed a place to lie low, and frankly, you needed someone to keep an eye on you. It's not ideal, I know, but it seemed like a practical solution at the time. Ellie could hear Charlotte's voice faintly in the background, a murmur of words that made Daniel sigh impatiently. Look, Mom, I have to go. Charlotte's calling for me. We'll discuss this like adults when I get back from the trip. And with that, he abruptly ended the call. Ellie stood holding the dead phone, her hand trembling. Discuss it like adults. The phrase rang hollow, mocking. Her son, her own flesh and blood, saw her not as a sentient, capable individual, but as a problem to be solved. Her autonomy a mere negotiable inconvenience. The sting of his dismissal was almost as painful as the revelation of his betrayal. The house, once a comforting embrace, now felt like a stage for a sinister play. Driven by a desperate need to understand the full extent of the invasion, Ellie forced herself to ascend the attic stairs. The dusty air was thick with the lingering scent of stale food and disuse. Victoria's makeshift living space was exactly as she'd described. A crumpled sleeping bag in a corner, surrounded by discarded plastic containers, empty water bottles, and a small propane camping stove. A battery-powered radio lay on a crate, its antenna extended. It was a squalid, pathetic existence, yet it held the chilling weight of a calculated surveillance operation. Her eyes scanned the mess, searching until something tucked beneath the sleeping bag caught her attention. A small, spiral-bound notebook. Ellie's blood ran cold as she picked it up, her fingers brushing against the worn cover. Inside, written in Victoria's neat, cursive hand, were observations about Ellie's daily routine. The entries were meticulous, chilling in their detail. July 15th, Ellie went for her morning walk, left door unlocked for 5 minutes. July 20th, almost forgot to take evening medication, reminded her quietly, pretended to be a creaking floorboard. August 3rd, called Daniel today, complained of feeling tired, confused dates of appointments. August 10th, left the stove on for 10 minutes after making tea. Dangerous. Ellie's heart pounded against her ribs. These weren't innocent observations. They were fabricated, or at best, twisted interpretations designed to paint a picture of an aging woman losing her grip. She never left her door unlocked. She meticulously organized her medications. Her brief forgetfulness, a normal part of aging, had been weaponized. At the very back of the notebook, tucked into a small pocket, she found a business card. Dr. Evelyn Reed, geriatric psychiatrist. Scrawled underneath in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting was a note. Initial consultation scheduled for October 15th. D says, bring documentation of incidents. October 15th, that was next week. Daniel had planned a psychiatric evaluation for her based on Victoria's meticulously fabricated evidence. The pieces of Daniel's sinister plot were slotting into place with terrifying precision. Beneath the notebook, a slim manila folder lay hidden. Ellie's hand shook as she opened it. Inside, she found photocopies of her confidential medical documents, her insurance policy, and even a copy of her will. Daniel had somehow accessed these through his power of attorney, which she had granted him years ago, trusting him implicitly. Then she gasped. Tucked amongst the papers were photographs. Candid shots of her in her garden, blissfully unaware. In her kitchen, pouring coffee. One, even more invasive, showed her asleep in her armchair, her head tilted, vulnerable. Victoria hadn't just been observing, she had been actively documenting, capturing evidence for Daniel's insidious plan. At the very bottom of the folder, the document that laid bare Daniel's true intentions, a formal legal document titled Petition for Guardianship. It sought to declare her mentally incompetent, citing the fabricated documentation from Victoria's notebook and referencing the upcoming Dr. Reed evaluation as justification for immediate intervention. Ellie felt a primal scream rise in her throat, quickly stifled by icy resolve. This wasn't concern, it was a hostile takeover. She grabbed her phone, her fingers flying to dial the one person she knew could help, Brenda Jensen, her attorney. Brenda listened patiently, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Ellie's furious revelations. When Ellie finished, the silence on Brenda's end was heavy. "Ellie, this is deeply disturbing," Brenda finally said, her voice grave. "Guardianship proceedings are often abused, especially when there's a sizable estate involved. Your home, your investments. You're a woman of means, and that makes you a target." Ellie's estate, a comfortable $700,000 built over decades of careful management, suddenly felt like a curse. "What do we do, Brenda?" Ellie asked, her voice tight with suppressed rage. "We fight back," Brenda declared, her tone firm, resolute. "First, we immediately file a restraining order against Victoria and, given his involvement, potentially Daniel. We demonstrate your competency to the court unequivocally, and we gather every piece of evidence of Daniel's fraud, his manipulation, and his blatant disregard for your well-being. This isn't just about protecting your assets, Ellie. This is about protecting your life and your autonomy." That evening, with Brenda's paralegal present as a legal witness, Ellie meticulously photographed every piece of incriminating evidence she'd found in the attic. Each click of the camera was a reaffirmation of her resolve, a silent promise to herself that she would not be diminished, not by her son, nor by her manipulative former sister-in-law. The surveillance photos, Victoria's twisted journal entries, Daniel's scrawled notes on Dr. Reed's card, and the dreaded petition for guardianship, all were carefully documented, locked away as ammunition for the fight ahead. The next morning, a steely determination had replaced Ellie's initial shock and despair. She picked up the phone and dialed Dr. Evelyn Reed's office. The receptionist, after locating Ellie's upcoming appointment, sounded genuinely concerned. "Mrs. Vance, are you sure?" Mr. Vance stressed the urgency, mentioning several episodes you have been having. "I am absolutely certain," Ellie stated, her voice firm, unwavering. "There have been no episodes. This appointment was made under false pretenses. Please cancel it immediately." As she hung up, a cold shiver ran down her spine. She realized how terrifyingly close she had come to walking blindly into Daniel's trap. A psychiatric evaluation based on fabricated evidence could have very easily led to an emergency guardianship order, swiftly stripping her of her independence and consigning her to a life she did not choose. The thought fueled her righteous anger. That evening, the familiar sounds of Daniel and Charlotte's car pulling into the driveway, followed by the chatter of her grandchildren, usually brought a warmth to Ellie's heart. Tonight, it felt like a chilling prelude to battle. They walked in, looking every inch the picture-perfect family returning from a ski trip, blissfully unaware that their meticulously crafted deception had been laid bare. Ellie met them in the foyer, her expression unreadable. "Daniel, Charlotte, please come into the living room. We need to talk." They exchanged a glance, a flicker of apprehension in Daniel's eyes, but followed her. Ellie led them to the coffee table, where she had carefully arranged all the evidence. Victoria's journal, the surveillance photos, the copies of her medical records, and finally, the damning petition for guardianship. Daniel's cheerful demeanor evaporated. He went utterly still, his gaze fixed on the papers. Where did you get these?" he asked, his voice strained, a telltale tremor in his usually confident tone. "From the attic," Ellie replied, her voice dangerously calm. "From the little apartment your accomplice, Helen Morrison, was living in." Charlotte, ever the smoother operator, stepped forward, a practiced, soothing smile on her face. "Faye, darling, please, let's not be dramatic. We were only trying to help you, for your safety." Her hand reached out, as if to pat Ellie's arm, but Ellie instinctively flinched away. Ellie picked up Victoria's notebook, her fingers tracing the cruel words. "Help me? Is this what you call help, Charlotte?" She opened it to a page detailing a supposed incident of confusion. "This entry, forgot to take evening medication. It's a lie. This one is left the stove on." Another fabrication. "You and Victoria, you fabricated these entries. these observations, to paint a picture of me as senile, as incapable, so you could declare me mentally incompetent and take control of my life, my home, my finances. Charlotte's mask finally slipped. Her eyes, usually so warm and inviting, turned cold and calculating, utterly devoid of the warmth Ellie had once believed in. Someone needs to make difficult decisions for you, Faye. You're not capable of looking after yourself anymore. It's for your own good. We were trying to protect you from yourself. My only limitation, Ellie retorted, her voice rising in a crescendo of anger, is that I trusted my own family not to spy on me, to lie to me, and to plot against me. That is my one and only limitation, Charlotte. Daniel, finally finding his voice, tried to interject. Mom, you can't live alone forever. We're just trying to prevent... Prevent what, Daniel? Ellie interrupted, her gaze piercing him. Prevent me from living my life as I choose? Prevent me from having my independence? You were trying to prevent that by having me institutionalized, by taking away everything I've worked for, everything I value. She paused, her chest heaving with emotion. This is my home. You two get out. Tonight, pack your bags and leave. Charlotte's face contorted in a sneer. Don't think this is over, Faye. We'll have to pursue other options. You'll regret this. Ellie simply stared at them, her expression unwavering. She watched them pack their bags, the children's confused questions ignored, their angry whispers hushed. As the door finally closed behind them, a profound silence settled over the house. A heavy sadness mingled with a fierce new strength. She had to protect herself, protect her home, from her own family. 3 days later, the phone rang. It was Brenda. Her voice was calm, reassuring. Ellie, the restraining order against Daniel and Charlotte has been approved. They're legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of your property or contacting you. It's a start. The sense of fragile peace that had settled over Ellie's home was shattered 3 days later, precisely at 8:15 a.m. The familiar crunch of tires on her gravel driveway, the sharp clang of a car door, sent a jolt through her. Daniel and Charlotte, they were back. Ellie, now forewarned and fortified by Brenda's call, did not rush to the door. Instead, she moved with deliberate calm, asserting the new dynamic she had been forced to establish. Mom, open the door! We need to talk! Daniel's voice, a mixture of impatience and thinly veiled frustration, carried through the sturdy oak. Ellie waited a beat, then another, letting the silence emphasize her control. Finally, she approached the door, unlatched the deadbolt, but kept the heavy chain securely fastened. She opened it just a crack, enough to see their faces, but maintaining a physical barrier between them. What do you want, Daniel? She asked, her voice cool, devoid of the warmth she once reserved for him. Daniel's face darkened instantly as his eyes registered the chain. Really, Mom? You're going to lock me out of my childhood home? Your own son? The outrage in his voice was palpable, yet it rang hollow to Ellie. It's my house, Daniel, Ellie stated, her voice clear and firm. And you and Charlotte are no longer welcome here. With a decisive click, she dropped the chain and stepped out onto the small porch, positioning herself in plain sight of any potential neighbors, ensuring there would be witnesses to this final painful confrontation. Charlotte immediately interjected, stepping forward with an aggrieved expression. Faye, this is completely unreasonable. We were trying to help you, and you're treating us like criminals. You're rejecting our help. Help? Ellie scoffed, the word a bitter taste in her mouth. Is that what you call it? Sneaking a fugitive into my attic to spy on me? Fabricating lies about my mental state? Plotting to have me declared incompetent and steal my life savings? Her voice rose, laced with righteous indignation. That's not help, Charlotte. That's abuse. Daniel took a menacing step closer, his eyes narrowed, attempting to use physical proximity to intimidate her. You don't know what's best for you anymore, Mom. You're too old to see your own limitations. We have your best interests at heart. Exactly, Charlotte chimed in, reinforcing his narrative. You're failing at being realistic about the future, Faye. You need supervision. We're just trying to prepare for what's inevitable. Ellie met Daniel's gaze, unflinching. Do you remember Daniel after Richard died? How I helped you, how I lent you a substantial amount of money to help start your business without a second thought, because I trusted you completely. She watched as a flicker of discomfort crossed his face. I trusted you then, implicitly. And you dismiss that trust now because you've decided I'm too old to make my own decisions? That I'm suddenly incapable? She shook her head slowly, a profound sadness settling over her. I am not incompetent. I am not declining. And every piece of evidence you and Victoria collected was a calculated fabrication. You used my kindness, my loneliness, my trust to plot against me, to steal my autonomy. Then came the final blow delivered with a calm, chilling certainty. My attorney, Brenda Jensen, has documented everything. Every piece of evidence, every photograph, and she has documented Victoria's full confession to the police, including her true identity and the entire arrangement she had with you. Daniel's face, which had been set in a mask of defiance, instantly paled. The color drained from his cheeks as the reality of Victoria's confession, a loose end he hadn't accounted for, hit him. Charlotte, for her part, tried to bluster, "That's a lie! She has no proof!" But the conviction was gone from her voice, replaced by a tremor of fear. Ellie simply raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. Her voice was steady, firm, imbued with the strength she had rediscovered. The restraining order has been approved. It's in effect as of this morning. Any attempt by either of you to approach this property or to contact me in any way will result in immediate arrest. Her gaze, unwavering, fixed on her son. This is over, Daniel. Our relationship, as it was, is over. As Daniel and Charlotte turned to walk back to their car, the defeat in their posture was palpable. Yet Charlotte couldn't resist one final venomous shot. She paused, her eyes narrowed, her voice dripping with malice. This isn't over, Faye. We won't let you destroy yourself. It was a warning, a promise of continued malevolence, disguised as concern. Ellie watched them drive away, the familiar car disappearing down the street, leaving an unfamiliar emptiness in its wake. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of battle. A fierce pride swelled in her chest, a sense of power she hadn't realized she possessed. She had faced them, her own son and daughter-in-law, and she had stood her ground. Later that afternoon, Brenda called. Her voice was calm but held a note of gravity. Ellie, I've been doing some digging into Daniel and Charlotte's financial situation. It appears they filed for bankruptcy last year. A significant amount of debt, hidden even from creditors, I suspect. The revelation hit Ellie like a cold splash of water. It was never about her safety or her decline. It was about money, her assets, her comfortable estate, which had suddenly become a tempting solution to their desperate financial woes. Their concern was a thin veneer over raw greed and calculated manipulation. The following day, a call came through from an unknown number. Ellie almost ignored it, but something compelled her to answer. It was Victoria calling from jail. "Lala," she pleaded, her voice hoarse, desperate. "Please don't hang up. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But I need to tell you the truth, the whole truth, about Daniel, about Charlotte, about what they really plan to do to you." Reluctantly, Ellie listened, her grip tightening on the phone. Victoria, fueled by a mixture of fear, regret, and perhaps a desperate need for redemption, spilled everything. She revealed the name of the facility Daniel and Charlotte had planned for Ellie, Sunset Manor. "It's a remote place, Ellie," Victoria explained, her voice trembling. "Out in the countryside. People go in there and they're medicated into compliance. Forgotten. Daniel said it was for difficult patients. They wanted to make you a difficult patient." A chill far colder than the autumn air permeated Ellie's bones. "Make me a difficult patient?" Victoria confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, they wanted me to help them convince you to take certain medications, drugs that cause confusion, memory loss, disorientation, to mimic dementia, to make sure you failed that psychiatric evaluation. They needed you to appear truly incompetent so they could get that guardianship without a fight." She admitted she had initially gone along with it, desperate and scared, believing Daniel's lies about Ellie's accelerating decline. "But as I watched you," Victoria continued, a note of genuine remorse in her voice, "from the attic, day after day, I realized the truth. You're not declining, you're not confused, you're not incompetent, you're just alone. The depth of the betrayal was staggering, an abyss of malice Ellie hadn't believed her own son capable of. The insidious plot, not just to steal her money and her autonomy, but to actively destroy her mind, left her shattered. But from that shattering, a new clarity emerged. Ellie immediately contacted Brenda Jensen. "Brenda," she stated, her voice firm, resolute, "I want to change my will. Daniel gets nothing. Charlotte gets nothing. Everything. Every single penny goes to charity, specifically to organizations that support seniors fighting against elder abuse and to a fund for independent living for older women." Her next call was to a local realtor. The large family home, once a symbol of her life, now felt like a cage, tainted by deceit. She put it on the market. Within weeks, she received an offer from a young couple, bubbling with excitement as they spoke of raising their own children within its walls. Watching them, Ellie felt a profound sense of joy, knowing her home would finally be filled with genuine love and honest dreams. She sold it for a fair $420,000, enough to secure her future comfortably. Ellie didn't choose a nursing home. Instead, she found a charming, smaller townhouse in an active adult community, bustling with independent, vibrant seniors. It was a place designed for growth, for connection, for new beginnings, everything Daniel had tried to deny her. Sophia, who had become a true friend through this ordeal, helped Ellie pack, her kind eyes reflecting the shared journey. "Ready for new memories, Ellie?" Sophia asked gently. "More than ready, dear," Ellie replied, a genuine smile gracing her lips. 2 months after Ellie settled into her new home, she received another unexpected call. It was Isabel Hayes, Victoria's daughter, now a grown woman. Isabel apologized profusely for her mother's actions, her voice thick with shame and regret. She spoke of her mother's desperate past, her own painful childhood without a mother, and the recent discovery of her mother's secret life. The conversation offered Ellie a new perspective, revealing the generational damage Victoria's choices had caused, a ripple effect of pain. 6 months after her move, the restraining order against Daniel and Charlotte expired. There were no calls, no attempts at contact. Daniel, having been exposed, having lost his inheritance, had seemingly vanished from her life. But Ellie didn't feel a void. She felt content, surrounded by new friends, new activities, and a renewed sense of purpose. She had chosen happiness, respect, and independence over familial obligation, and in doing so, had truly reclaimed her life.